You're listening to the Renegade Blitz, the best podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. Read articles on RenegadeBlitz.com, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app.
All right, and welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Ty Polk with Chris Ward and Brandon Walker. Back on to talk Steelers versus Eagles, and we welcome back a guest from the early stages of this podcast, all the way back during the pandemic times 2 years ago. We have Jon Marks of SportsRadio94 WIP, the flagship station for the Philadelphia Eagles. And of course, he's also rocking the Philadelphia Phillies hoodie as well. He's excited. Everything's going roses here in Philadelphia sports, with the exception of the Flyers, because but it's always good to have you on, Jon. Thank you for coming on again.
Yeah, appreciate it. I got to pinch myself. The Eagles are undefeated and the Phillies are in the World Series. Like, who saw this happening? I certainly didn't.
Nah, none of us at all, but at least you have the Flyers to take you back down there. But anyway.
Luckily, I don't pay much attention to the Flyers. I know in Pittsburgh, the Penguins are a big deal. Flyers haven't won in so long. It's tough to really get into them.
Hey, one day, just not today. Anyway, it's really huge for Philadelphia right now. There's trade rumors going abundance. We mentioned it a little bit before the show, but we want to focus on the one facet right now. Robert Quinn is coming to Philadelphia for a fourth-round pick in a draft that I forgot the year already. But regardless, it's clear that Philadelphia has gone back in. It's hearkening back to the Super Bowl day in which they were really all in and going in on free agency for Alshon Jeffrey, among many names. Of course, also they had LeGarrette Blount. It was a great time in Philadelphia sports, and of course now it's a great time as well. So what's the excitement level for Philadelphia around not just the Phillies, but the Eagles as we focused it on right now?
Oh, I mean, it's unbelievable. A lot of people were very, very bullish on the Eagles entering the season, in large part to who they added in the offseason. James Bradbury is their best second corner they've had in a really long time. Adding A.J. Brown via trade, along with Devontae Smith as their rookie wide receiver the year before. It's the best wide receivers they've had in I don't know how many years as far as duo. So the talent is there. The roster was improved. And from there, it was a matter of could the quarterback develop and be able to throw the ball well enough when teams said, hey, we're going to make you beat us with your arm and not your legs. Could he do that? And he's answered every single question. Jalen Hurts has been unbelievable. And if you look at the stats, I think he only has 6 passing touchdowns. They really don't even try to throw it much inside the red zone. They'll just march down the field, and Hurts is as effective a running quarterback, not as dynamic as a Lamar Jackson or a Michael Vick, not as dynamic of an athlete, but he's big. He'll run guys over. He'll carry guys. He's from the 1 yard line. He just gets in every time. You can't stop him. So what started as a season that looked like was very promising coming off of a playoff berth last year, I thought that they would be about the same team they were last year. I didn't see, even with the poor schedule that they have, and the NFC East is playing a very easy schedule as a whole this year. I didn't see 6-0. And when you look ahead at their schedule now, you're trying to find losses to get to 3. I mean, you really are. You're going to lose a game that you don't expect to. The NFL, you can lose any week. We all know that. But when you look at it and the way the Eagles are playing and the way the quarterback's playing and the talent that they have and kind of the chemistry that they have, they're a dangerous team in the NFC. And the NFC's down as a whole. The Bucs are down. The Packs are down. The Rams have that Super Bowl hangover. There's just not a lot of good teams in the NFC or the NFL, as we were talking about before we came on. So, this might be one of those prime years where not a lot of people expected it, and the Eagles are running with it. So, I mean, they look like the team to beat in the NFC right now for sure.
Real quick, I want to talk about Jalen Hurts. Of course, it's been a big thing with his ascension as a quarterback, and no one saw it coming. He's now completing 66.8% of his passes, and that was really one of the knocks with him. You knew he had the legs for it. You knew that he could take punishment. It was almost, well, they said like not Lamar Jackson, but I think a smaller Cam Newton was a lot of one I've seen from him. His growth as a passer, I want to talk about. How much during training camp was that emphasized?
During training camp, and we we tend to do this, that we're treating training camp practices like they're games, right? Like we're keeping score of throws, we're keeping track of throws. And when they have the joint practices, we're saying they won the joint practice. We didn't win the joint practice. He was kind of up and down. And then he got into a little bit of a groove later on in camp where he looked really good. And I was talking to Ron Jaworski shortly before the season started on my WIP show. And he had said that mechanics was the biggest issue with Jalen Hurts last year. The mechanics, right? Like he doesn't have the strongest arm. He doesn't have a pea shooter. He's got his arm's good enough to win in the NFL. Can he make the tight window throws that the Aaron Rodgers can and the guys with the elite arms can? No, he can't make those throws. But more than anything, it was just about him taking that next step into this season, anticipating more, not being gun shy to make throws, right? Like being smart with the football. And his development as a passer this year has been very impressive. He is, he's able to make every throw. They haven't had a deep play in a couple weeks. It feels like they're trying to take that away from the Eagles, but he's been great, and he's able to make plays with his legs that set up the throw. He's been able to drop back, and they're not doing a lot of where he drops back in a 5 or a 7 foot drop and he's surveying the field and he's going from read to read to read. That's not what that's part of every offense. That's not what they do a lot, but he's had that growth this year to where he can sit back there and he can say, oh, first option not there, second option not there. Let me stay in the pocket. Let me find my third option. So as you would expect with a young player that's entering another year in the same offense, he has that growth and he's made it. So Jalen Hurts has made himself a lot of money, guys. You keep playing like this, and he's a second-round draft pick, so he has one more year left. After this year, he's got the 4 years. They don't have the fifth-year option, so he's made himself a lot of money this year. And if the Eagles, they keep rolling like this and they win as many games as they're probably going to win in the regular season, Jalen Hurts is going to make a lot of money in Philadelphia.
And speaking of his targets, AJ Brown, a big trade in the offseason from Tennessee. He was really productive there. Devontae Smith, Alabama product, Quez Watkins, speedy receiver, Dallas Goedert, tight end. So how do you think the Eagles passing game matches up against the Steelers? They got exposed really, really bad against Buffalo a couple of weeks, gave up a bunch of explosive touchdowns. They did pretty good against Brady, but I mean, now we know that they lost the Panthers, so that win doesn't look as impressive. Then they did pretty good on Sunday night, even though they started off slow. So how do you think that matchup will play out with the Eagles passing game against the Steelers secondary?
It's interesting because if you look at the Eagles and you look through their games, they score in bunches. Right. So if you go back and you just look at quarter by quarter in each game, they scored 24 points against the Commanders in one quarter. That's all they scored for the whole game. They scored the lion's share of their points against Minnesota in one quarter. Against Dallas, they really scored. They needed points in the fourth quarter to get back up against the Cowboys, and they did. But so they've been scoring points in bunches, and then they've been cold for bunches. So a lot of that is it feels like they get that early lead and then they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Do we get conservative? Do we run the ball more? It is weird because it seems like when they need the biggest play, they run and they're able to do it, which I don't think is a bad thing as long as you're able to pass. But the last couple of weeks, when they've needed a drive where momentum has totally swung and it's like, hey, you go 3 and out on this drive, you're going to lose because they're going to score again. You know how it is with the momentum in the NFL where now the offense just needs to keep their defense off the field. So the biggest thing with this offense, what they've showed me is that when they need that drive and they need to put points on the board and they need to chew up clock, they kind of lean on the running game, and it's much more of a run pass mix. What they've done early in games is they've come out throwing. So if I was the Steelers, I'd say, okay, they're going to come out throwing. So what are we going to do? Maybe you play zone. What a lot of teams have been doing is playing a cover 2, and they're not allowing anything to get thrown over their heads. They're trying to keep everything in front of them. The Eagles have shown that they can really kind of go 7-8 yards at a time, scramble a little bit, get 7 yards, A.J. Brown for 15 yards, Dallas Goedert for 12 yards. That's the other thing about this offense is with A.J. Brown and with Devontae Smith, with Dallas Goedert, who's one of the better tight ends in the league, and then they have a couple of different running backs that can come out of the backfield as receivers or running the football. They're really diverse, and it's the best skill guys that they've had in a while. It's not an explosive passing offense, so don't think of it like that. But like if you dare them to pass it, they'll pass it and they'll beat you. So if I was defending the Eagles, I would probably play a lot of zone, and I would try to trick Hurts into kind of misreading coverages and things like that.
All right, let's talk about the Eagles' offensive line going left to right. Jordan Mailata, did I say
Mailata.
Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelsey, the future Hall of Famer in my opinion. Yep. Isaac Seimalu, thank you, and Lane Johnson, who's always perennially underrated.
Yeah.
Do you think they're as good as the offensive line? Because I thought there was the best offensive line in the league when they won the Super Bowl. Do you think that line is better? Because I think this may be the best unit in football.
Worst case, it's comparable. Best case, it is better. Jason Peters was their left tackle, and he went out with a season-ending injury. So Halimua Baitai was their starting left tackle for the majority of that season. And I don't know what it is, Sayamalu, Baitai, Mailata, right? Like they don't have Smiths and Johnsons and Jacksons and things like that. But yeah, so here's what the offensive line is. And I agree with you. If it's not the best, it's one of the best offensive lines in the league, is that they can beat you with run blocking or pass blocking. Mailata is an incredible athlete. He was a rugby player. So you know how the NFL has the NFL has a program where they give you incentives to draft international players to where they don't carry a roster spot. So you can draft a guy that's from a different country and he doesn't carry against your 53-man roster. That's what they did with Sayamalu. He hadn't played organized football. He was a rugby player, and he's 6'8", 350 pounds, and he would run with it. If you look at the videos, he's like a 360-pound running back with great feet and great athleticism. So they kept him for like his first 2 years, just trying to show him the game. He never played. He never saw it. Right? Like think about picking up football and coming here and not ever playing it. It's crazy. Not knowing the rules, not knowing anything. So after a couple of years of more or less like redshirting, he became the starter, and he's a Pro Bowl level player. The one thing the Eagles do very well, and I think it's something that like the Steelers always draft and develop very well on defense, linebackers, defensive linemen, wide receivers, running backs, things like that. The Eagles draft very well in the offensive line, and they develop very well in the offensive line. So since Andy Reid was here in the late 90s until now, priority number one is always the offensive line and the defensive line. And the offensive line is always very good. This might be the best line I've ever seen. Mailata's an all-pro type. Landon Dickerson was a second-round draft pick out of Alabama. He would have been a first-round pick, but he tore his ACL in the national championship game. And he came back and played the next year for the Eagles. But he was a good value in the second round. As you mentioned, Kelsey is probably a future Hall of Famer. He's an all-time Eagle. Sayamalu is a solid starter, and Lane Johnson is extremely underrated. He hasn't given up a sack in 2 years. He hasn't given up a sack in 2 years at right offensive tackle. So the Eagles put priority on the offensive line. Lane Johnson actually still hasn't cleared concussion protocol. He was at practice today. He didn't practice fully because he hasn't cleared protocol. He's still iffy for the game on Sunday. I think he plays just because he was out there on Wednesday. But it could be Jack Driscoll, who's their swing tackle and their backup. But to get back to your original question, Brandon, this offensive line is the strength of the team, just like it was in 2017, and it's going to do the Eagles a lot of good. It always does.
Yeah, and one thing about that's also paid off for them is Miles Sanders being patient with him. I remember for years they really didn't figure out what to do with him, and now they seem to have a plan. He's currently averaging 4.6 yards a carry as the lead back for the Eagles. Right behind is Jalen Hurts, who, of course, as a running quarterback, picks up most of the slack as well. But also, even their I guess tertiary, for lack of a better term, Kenneth Gainwell has 4.2 yards. How have those two backs and how those two backs benefited from this offensive line.
Yeah, Miles Sanders' problem has never been the talent. It's been staying healthy, and that's not something he's really been able to do in his career. His rookie year has probably been his best year, where it's like the book out of him coming out of Penn State, and the Eagles drafted him in the second round out of Penn State was, well, he's not really good as a receiver out of the backfield, good running back, but like we don't know how good. And he was very good as a receiver out of the backfield his rookie season, like really, really good, and kind of went backwards since then. The running style is more of a, come on, turn up the field, turn up the field, stop going east-west. You got to go north and south. And I think this year he's done a really good job of going more north-south than constantly trying to go around the tackle. It's like, hit the hole, man. So he's done it. And he's been healthy, which is the other thing. They have a pretty good, they led the NFL in rushing last year. And it was out without really having an elite rushing attack outside of the quarterback. Jalen Hurts, I think, had 784 yards and double-digit touchdowns. So, like, that's a part of your rushing attack, but how much are they design runs and how much are they just scrambles? And a lot of them were scramble yards. What the Eagles are doing this year is they're incorporating Jalen into more designed runs, which I don't agree with, because he takes way too many hits when he does that, and that's a tough way to live. But just like the Giants are doing with Daniel Jones, Jalen Hurts is a part of the running game. So between Miles Sanders and Jalen Hurts, and then they have, you mentioned Kenny Gainwell, who's kind of their third down back, and Boston Scott, who's the 5'6" bowling ball, who could get 2 or 3, 4 carries a game or something like that. They can run the ball, but they can run the ball with the offensive line, right? Like the holes are good. They get in there, right? Like if these guys are running on a below average offensive line, we're probably not talking much about them. We're not talking about this rushing attack. It's the offensive line, and it works. I mean, they're on a roll right now with the four backs, because I'll include Jalen Hurts on that. It works. They can run the ball.
Yeah, and then moving to the defensive side of the ball, you mentioned how the Eagles always like to invest in the defensive line. You have Brandon Graham, who's been with the Eagles for quite some time. Fletcher Cox, one of the best in the league. Javon Hargrave, we're familiar with him when he was with the Steelers. And then, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show about the trade for Robert Quinn. And then the Eagles also have Jordan Davis, the rookie, who I liked really a lot coming out of the draft. And the Eagles picked him before the Steelers got a chance to pick in this past year's draft. But how do you think how impressive has the Eagles defensive line been this year, and how do you think they match up against the Steelers offensive line, which is kind of like mediocre at best? They don't really do a great job running the ball, and they're better at pass protection.
Yeah. So Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham are on their last year or two, right? Brandon is a free agent after this year, and Fletcher, they actually cut him and then re-signed him and still paid him like a good amount of money, like $14 or $15 million. But, they moved on from the long-term portion of the contract. So he might be in his last year. Brandon, maybe he's back another year, because he's a glue guy. He's a leader. He was at NFC Defensive Player of the Week a couple weeks ago at 2.5 sacks. Hassan Reddick's their best pass rusher, signed away from Carolina. So the Eagles have always, except for a couple years under Chip Kelly, ran a 4-3 defense. And, that's pretty much all we've ever known since Marion Campbell back in the early 80s. A couple years under Chip Kelly, he had Billy Davis as their defensive coordinator, and they ran a 3-4. But this team, they're kind of segueing to what a lot of teams do right now, which is they run this hybrid where sometimes it's a 4-3, sometimes it's a 3-4. They have 4-3 personnel. Signing Hassan Reddick in the offseason gave them their first real 3-4 rush linebacker. So he is their primary, and he is their best pass rusher. Brandon makes plays. He gets pressures. He'll get sacks. Javon Hargrave, man, he had like a great first half of the season last year and really hasn't been heard from since. I mean, he looked like an all-pro, and then he's really slowed down. Josh Sweat's another defensive end who's kind of more of a rotational guy, but he's a starter at this point. I'm sure Quinn's going to push for some of his snaps when he gets here and he gets up to speed on the defense. But they've gotten to the passer, and they can be dangerous. It just depends. Like a bad offensive line, you could be in trouble. They don't blitz a lot. That's the one thing. They don't blitz a lot. They will blitz. And when they pick and choose their spots, they can be good at it. But for the most part, like a lot of defensive coordinators outside of Pittsburgh or Blitzburg, what teams are trying to do these days is they're trying to keep everything in front of them. They're trying to limit big plays. And the one thing that the Eagles have this year that they haven't had in previous years are good cornerbacks. So if you got corners that can play one-on-one and can play man and can play up to the line of scrimmage, it's going to help your pass rush. It's going to help everything else.
Okay, let's get to the secondary. You got James Bradbury that you talked about, Darius Slay, C.J. Garner-Johnson, which you guys got from New Orleans, and Marcus Epps. Do you think that's the strength? That's the strength of your of your defense is the secondary?
Epps has been good. He's he was an undrafted player out of Montana, and he was a walk-on in Montana. So that tells you that, like, when you're looking for kind of a diverse defense, he's a guy that's earned every single minute that he's ever played in football, and he's been good, right? Like, he's not a Pro Bowl level type player, but he's played well. But I would agree, Brandon, that the cornerbacks, Darius Slay and Bradbury, are playmakers. They've made big interceptions. They've been incredible as far as getting turnovers and things like that. And you mentioned Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He was acquired right before the beginning of the regular season. I think they gave up a 4th-round draft pick from the Saints. Final year of a rookie contract. I think he kind of wore out his welcome down in New Orleans. The dude's unbelievably talented, and he's made a couple of really great and big plays. And he made an interception in the Cowboys game where he looked like an all-pro wide receiver with how he caught the ball. He got his feet down. He turned his body around so he didn't land on the ball and it would bounce out. He got over on his back. It was like everything that you would want to see technically from a wide receiver. He did as a defensive back. So he's kind of your backup, your safety, your slot corner, because there are other cornerbacks, Avonte Maddox, who is actually from Pittsburgh, Avonte.
Yeah.
So he's excellent. He's very, very good. He's found his home. The Eagles signed him to a new contract. He got an extension. He's their nickel corner, and that's a starting corner in the NFL in 2022. He's really, really good. He's a good tackler, even for his size, and he's good with those smaller slot receivers. And then Chauncey Gardner-Johnson just kind of does everything else. So the secondary is the strength of the team for sure. The linebackers are improved as well. The Eagles have never valued or paid a lot of money to linebackers. Kaiser White is a player that they got in free agency from the Chargers, who's a really good player. And then TJ Edwards is a guy that was undrafted that they've kind of brought along, and he's probably their best linebacker or their best tackler. He'll get the most tackles. When you watch most games, he's around the ball the most. He's their highest volume tackler. So, I mean, honestly, for all the talk with Jalen Hurts and all the talk AJ Brown and the offense, without this defense, they're not undefeated. They've bailed the offense. We talked about the offense scoring in bunches, and they're still able to win games. They're still able to win games because the defense is holding the other team in the second half. So the defense has probably been the more valuable unit on this team so far.
And of course, the big story of this game, you mentioned Avonte Maddox, an opportunity for pit-on-pit crime with Kenny Pickett is from Ocean Township, New Jersey. So this is kind of a home game for him. And with it, he was even once upon a time linked to Temple to being the quarterback before Pitt signed him up.
Yep.
So how's the talk been about seeing Pickett come in? There's a lot of debate about him as a quarterback here in Pittsburgh. Definitely the last interception at most, the last two were his. You could say, okay, that's just a bad throw, but it's a rookie. And of course, you guys have had to deal with that with Hurts and Wentz before that. So what has been the thoughts about Kenny Pickett so far, at least in Philadelphia?
So we actually, you have to understand, Jalen Hurts being the quarterback right now, the last two, this offseason, even in the offseason before, after Wentz was gone, the Eagles were looking around for other quarterbacks. If Russell Wilson, and thank God this didn't happen, if Russell Wilson would have came to Philly, I think the Eagles would have traded for him. The Eagles liked Jalen Hurts. They didn't love Jalen Hurts. I think that they liked a lot of things about him, but ultimately they said, is he a special quarterback? Is he a guy that could make every throw? And I think the Eagles were unsure. So if Deshaun Watson would have came to Philly, if Russell Wilson would have came to Philly, if they would have been able to maneuver, they tried to trade up to get Zach Wilson in whatever draft that was 2 years ago, and the Jets just weren't budging because they could have gotten up to 3, where San Francisco eventually got up to, but the Jets weren't giving up with Zach Wilson. So we, in this offseason, we're talking about quarterbacks, and we were talking about Malik Willis. we were talking about Kenny Pickett. I don't know if you guys know, but there was Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM, was at a Pitt game, and he had the binoculars, and there's a picture of him, the binoculars, looking at Kenny Pickett like, hey, Kenny Pickett. So we talked a lot about Kenny Pickett, and we call him Two Gloves because he obviously needs the gloves because the hands are small. But I mean, he's a rookie. He looks like that maybe the ceiling's not going to be as high as some other quarterbacks, but Pittsburgh is an organization that doesn't win because of high-end quarterback talent. I know Ben's a Hall of Famer, so I'm not trying to say otherwise, but like, can Kenny Pickett be a good enough quarterback and a professional quarterback if the rest of the team around him is that good? Yeah, I mean, I think he can. Is he going to? He looks like a rookie right now, and I know he's not a young rookie. He looks like a rookie right now. So honestly, not a lot of talk about the Steelers. Eagles are coming off the bye week. And the Phillies are in the Super Bowl, or in the World Series. So it'll very much be a reaction after the game, but not a lot of a build-up or like a Kenny Pickett revenge weekend or anything like that.
And John, I want to talk a little bit about Nick Sirianni because I think almost all, I know Brandon for sure, and even myself, we weren't really sure when they hired him as the head coach. We really weren't, But he's done a remarkable job, and I know today he spoke with the media. I guess he grew up like a Pittsburgh, like his family's from Western PA, I believe, and his brother actually coaches at Washington Jefferson, like a Division III school, which is pretty close by here. So what was he mean? What was he meant to the Eagles organization so far? And does he ever talk about he did today, but does he ever talk about because he went to Division III Mount Union also, which is in Ohio. So does he ever talk about coming from that type of background?
So he grew up in like Buffalo suburbs, so Western New York. So it would make sense that the Pirates would be his team just based on, I guess the geographic area. And I don't know if his dad or whatever were Pirates fans, but Sal Capaccio, who is the Bills reporter for our station, our Odyssey station up in Buffalo, and he's on the broadcast, the Bills broadcast, his dad was a coach. Nick Sirianni's dad was a coach, a well-known kind of legacy coach up there. So everybody knows the Sirianni family because now they're all coaches, and Nick became a head coach before his brothers did, I believe. But as far as what he's meant to the organization, after the initial press conference that he got hired and you put him out there, it was a train wreck, right? Like I saw it just like everybody else did. And we made fun of him and we wondered if he could hack it in Philadelphia. And it's not an easy place to play quarterback. It's not an easy place to be a star. It's not an easy place to be a coach. It's just not. We will question you. It's the same thing in Pittsburgh with you guys and the Steelers. So he has done an excellent job in rebounding from that first press conference, learning on the job, and more than anything, his players like him. His players play for him. If you ask his players about Nick Sirianni, they will almost always talk about the energy and everything else that comes with him. But then they also, there's a human side to him, right? Like, it's not all about just football. It's about how's the family? How are you doing? How's your mom doing? Right? Like, Nick has a couple of young kids. They come to the press conferences with them. You'll see him around where they practice and everything else like that. So is he an offensive guru? No, Sean McVay is he's boy genius. Like, you're hiring him because he's an offensive genius. He's a schemer. It's not Nick Sirianni. It's not Nick Sirianni. I would almost compare him to a Sean McDermott or a Mike Tomlin. Normally, when you have an offensive coach from an offensive background, they're there because you want them calling plays. And an offensive head coach normally calls plays, or if he gives it up, like Andy Reid sometimes gives it up to the enemy or whatever. But he's taken on more of a CEO role, similar to Tomlin, similar to Sean McDermott. And it's really working for him. It is. He's got his guys playing for him. He's crazy on the sideline. He's nuts. He gets it after the officials. He'll F-bomb the other coach and the other players and stuff. So he's got to calm down a little bit. But he's got a good thing going right now. And I think he knows his place in the organization, right? Like, Chip Kelly had one good year and he got into a power struggle and he wanted all the control. Nick Sirianni's not going to do that. And it's working very well. The structure of the organization, similar to how it's worked so well with the Steelers for so many years, is working with Nick Sirianni and company, and he's done a really good job.
Okay, I know Philly's a big favorite in the game. name one thing or one player or that would concern you about the Sunday's game.
From the Eagles standpoint, I think more than anything, and it could be Lane Johnson on the offensive line if he's not able to play. They're pretty healthy otherwise, but I think the biggest thing with the Eagles is coming off a bye, feeling good about themselves. They're 6-0. They know that everybody's saying, the best team in the NFC. And then you come into it, and then you face a team like Pittsburgh, similar to what happened with Tampa, and you think you're just going to be able to, all right, we're big favorites, we're going to be able to walk over them, and they got something else for you. So, the Eagles are a good team. I'm really well balanced. Like some teams you have, like Kansas City comes to mind, where you have the awesome offense, but they can't stop anybody on defense in some years, right? Like the Bills are great with Josh Allen, but they can't run the ball, right? The Eagles are well balanced running and passing. Their defense is very good. I mean, honestly, if I was going to attack the Eagles, I would try to run right at them. I would try to run right at them, establish that, and then free up Kenny Pickett for some play action and try to make some plays down the field. If you become one-dimensional and have to throw the ball with a bad offensive line, it's probably going to be a long day. But I think that the circumstance and the week-to-week nature of the NFL, coming out of a bye week after beating the Cowboys, they could very easily come out flat, and that's how you lose a game like this on Sunday.
All right, so it's prediction time. For us, I think it's pretty clear we had the Eagles winning this game. So I'm going to also add in a wrinkle, percentage of upset as well for the Steelers in this game. I'm going to say that Philadelphia wins 30-20. I think they just keep on rolling, and again, it's a young quarterback, a great defense in terms of pass rushing. I really do believe, after really taking a look at how the Eagles run the 4-3, that's exactly how the 4-3 should be run. They can get pressure with only 4. And that's so huge for a team. That's why they won that Super Bowl. They didn't need to back anyone. They could back everyone up and say, throw it. Come on. Yep. But likely their defensive line will get to you beforehand. And as much as I want to believe, this offensive line for the Steelers is improving, and their best asset really is pass protection. It's just that Philadelphia, something's in the water. They're just on another level. Pickett gets a touchdown, maybe a passing, maybe a running somewhere along the line, but that's about it. It's a nice showing in, I guess, effectively his home team, for lack of a better term, but it's still not enough. Much too young, and the Steelers just don't have it going right now.
Yeah, the 10.5 points is a lot, because that allows for, especially from a betting standpoint, where Eagles are up big and they get backdoored with a late touchdown and it turns into a 9-point win rather than when they're up by 16. I do think that the way the Eagles have played this year, as far as jumping out to bigger leads and then kind of taking the foot off the gas a little bit and then needing kind of a late push to put the game away, is concerning. And that's why I would actually take the Steelers play. I mean, it's an Eagle line. It's a big line. It's an Eagle line. I know when I saw that the Steelers were underdogs by 14.5 points to the Bills, I was like, that's a lot of points, but it's telling me to take the Bills. I just think coming out of a bye week, they're going to be a little flat to come out, and they may need to rally even in the second half to get the win. I'd say a little bit of a closer game. So, and I do think they'll score some points. So I'll say 32-24. The Eagles get the win. The Steelers look respectable, and the Eagles continue to march on undefeated as the only undefeated NFL team.
I'm all in on the Eagles. The Steelers have a terrible history of playing games in Philadelphia. They haven't won there since 1965, so they lost 9 consecutive games when playing in Philadelphia. Wow. The last 2 times they played, they got absolutely destroyed. So, I'm probably going to take the line. I'm going to go 34-13. The Eagles win big, and another bad performance by the Steelers offense.
Wow, I like it.
Okay. How I feel about this, I will say Philly wins 34-17.
Yeah, it was. What about Howie Roseman, the GM, the job that he's done? Because he's like, I haven't really looked at the Eagles roster in depth, and I mean they're like loaded across the board. So I'll kind of speak to, and they have the Saints like the top first round pick this year. So that's pretty crazy.
He is. It was after the year that Carson Wentz got traded and they fired Doug Peterson. So 2 years ago. We do our studios, our WIP studios are on the Schuylkill River, and across the Schuylkill River is the highway, and someone spray painted a big piece of wood in orange that said "Fire Howie." So Howie Roseman is, when the Eagles are good, people are okay with Howie Roseman. When the Eagles aren't good, people go right for Howie Roseman. He's not a football guy. Right? Like, I think a lot of fans want to feel like the guy played football and he's got a pencil in his ear and he's like Jim Tonsul. He's grunting. Howie came up he was like a salary cap guy. He was like one of the first salary cap guys in the early 2000s with the Eagles, and he's worked his way up. He's not a talent evaluator. He's not a great drafter, although they've done better in previous years. He's a mover and a shaker. He's a wheeler and a dealer. So that's why you get these extra draft picks. He loves moving around in the draft, and he's able to sense real value. They got Robert Quinn for a 4th round draft pick, and if he gets a couple of sacks in big games, it's worth a 4th round draft pick. So he's a wheeler and dealer. He set the Eagles up to win a Super Bowl this year. He's done a great job.
That's Jon Marks from SportsRadio94 WIP, the Eagles flagship station. Jon, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sticking with us through technical difficulties as we're live, pal.
Oh, it's awesome. I always appreciate you guys asking me to come on. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jon. We'll make sure to tag you in once we get the podcast out and everything.
Cool. I'll retweet it.
All right, cool. I'll see you, Jon. Take care.
All right, guys. Thank you.
So that will do it for us on the Renegade Blitz. For Chris Ward and Brandon Walker, I'm Ty Polk. We'll have the recap podcast for you next week as the Steelers are in their final game before the bye week. And hope to have a good one for you. We'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at @RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. Read articles on RenegadeBlitz.com. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. The Renegade Blitz podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you can listen to podcasts.